Hello and good day everyone. سلام به همه دوستان و همکاران متخصص فارسی زبانم. مرحبا بجميع الأصدقاء الناطقين باللغة العربية. Before we begin, if you would like to listen in Arabic or Persian, please select your preferred language channel from the interpretation menu at the bottom of your Zoom window. The presentations include Arabic subtitles. Therefore, for Arabic participants, simultaneous interpretation will be provided only for the live interventions by the moderator and the project team. Persian interpretation will be provided simultaneously throughout the entire webinar, including both the presentations and the live discussions. On behalf of all my colleagues who have worked around the clock to bring this series to life, I want to warmly welcome you all to the very first session of Museums Connect Without Borders. This webinar series is organized by ICOM SAREC, the international committee dedicated to museum communication, marketing, and audience engagement. We are thrilled to be presenting this in collaboration with several ICOM national and international committees, which Lisa and Niloufar will share more about in just a few moments. My name is Negar Sagharichi, and I'm the secretary of ICOM Exhibitions, and it is my absolute pleasure to be your moderator today. To begin with, I would like to welcome Luis Marcello Mendes, the chair of ICOM. Oh, Luis is not here. So, Niloufar, Niloufar, I would like to invite you, my dear colleague Niloufar Yazkhasti, to turn on her microphone. Niloufar, could you please let us a bit know about how you and the ICOM Comms team organized this solidarity project, as well as the vision and inspiration behind this?
Thank you, Negar, and welcome everyone. Salam, ahlan wa sahlan, and hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for the very first webinar of Museums Connect Without Borders. I would like to begin with a verse written in the 13th century by the great Persian poet Sa'di, whose words have inspired the philosophy behind this project. Which said human beings are members of a whole in creation of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of you as human cannot retain. More than 700 years later, these words still remind us that solidarity is not simply an ideal, it is a responsibility. So I would like to take this opportunity to express my heartfelt gratitude to everyone who have made this initiative possible. My sincere thanks go to ICOM SAREC for believing in this project, to the ICOM Comms board, and especially to Luis Marcello Mendes for his continuous encouragement and support. And I would like to thank all of our partner committees, including ICOM Intercom, Documentation, ICOM Finland, Exhibitions, ICOMT, ICTAB, and all other committees, board members, speakers, and colleagues who have contributed their time, expertise, and to be honest, their trust. Finally, my deepest appreciation goes to our project team, whose dedication has transformed an idea into reality. Frankly speaking, this project was born under the most uncertain circumstances, even now, during conflict, blackouts, disrupted communication, and isolation. It also emerged from a question that had been on my mind for a long time, which is many museum professionals living under conflict, sanctions, political isolation, and long-term instability face significant barriers to funding, mobility, and international professional exchange. And this was the moment I asked myself, if they cannot come to international learning opportunities, why don't we bring those opportunities to them, and including myself? That simple question became the foundation of this program. What began as a regional initiative soon became a global collaborative effort, bringing together colleagues from around the world who believe that knowledge should remain accessible, especially when circumstances make it most difficult. I have truly poured my heart into this project, and I hope you will feel that throughout this webinar series. Over the coming months, we will explore 6 interconnected themes and workshops. Together, these sessions aim not only to exchange knowledge, but also to build lasting professional connections, mutual understanding, and solidarity across borders. Thank you once again for being part of this journey, and I hope you enjoy today's webinar. And above all, I hope our collective efforts contribute, however modestly, to a more connected, supportive, and peaceful museum community. Back to you, Negar.
Thank you so much, Nilofer. Thank you. And now I would like to invite Edurne Uriarte, the editor of ICOM Documentation, to join me in opening the session, which is dedicated to documentation experiences. Welcome, Edurne.
Thank you. Welcome, and thank you very much for having us here today. And we want to thank also Ihor, Poshyvailo. I hope I mentioned his name correctly. And we're very happy and we're very proud to be with you today. And I don't want to take more words from you, and I think we have a lot of things to do today. But on behalf of our chair, Jonathan Ward, I want to thank everyone, and we're very, very happy and very pleased to join you and be a part and include documentation in this process. Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Edurne Uriarte. I serve as editor on the board of ICOM Documentation. Today, I am speaking on behalf of our international committee to give you a general overview of who we are and what we do. Before I begin, we would like to thank ICOM Coms for inviting us to partner in this project, Museums Connect Without Borders. We truly appreciate the invitation as well as we consider this is a highly relevant topic, and we are honored to contribute to this conversation. So let me please start by introducing ICOM Documentation. ICOM Documentation is a recognized authority on museum documentation with an active membership base and a wide global network. We are aligned with the ICOM Strategic Plan 2022-2028 in order to comprise a community of international professionals working to advocate and advance documentation best practices within the sphere of cultural heritage. In order to do this, we promote best practices by advocating for the adoption of documentation standards, developing supporting tools, facilitating knowledge exchange within a professional network, and engaging in communication and training activities with the global museum community. Our mission is to advance a culture of documentation that is inclusive, collaborative, and grounded in professional knowledge. For that reason, we foster an international network that connects documentation professionals across generations, regions, and disciplines. Through the development of standards, tools, training, and knowledge exchange, we promote inclusive documentation practices that strengthen the preservation and transmission of cultural heritage worldwide. ICOM Documentation's work relies on the active engagement of its members through the board, working groups, and task forces, who are at the very core of what we do as a committee. They are the engine behind our results and deliverables. Currently, we have 9 working groups and 3 task forces. Some of the most well-known and long-standing ones include the CDOC CRM SIG, LIDO, Domino, and documentation standards. Others are more recent but already gaining momentum, such as exhibition and performance documentation and inclusive documentation. Our special task forces also reflect areas where we see an urgent need or an opportunity to make an impact. For example, we have a task force working on the definition of museum documentation, along with an accompanying article for our community. Another task force focused on strengthening the culture of documentation in the Ibero-American region, with a strong presence in Peru. And more recently, a task force developing a statement on artificial intelligence for our community and field. All of these are examples of the diverse, committed, and engaged community we are fortunate to have. This is our board. For the 2026-2028 period, we have a very interesting composition. It brings together a good mix of new and more experienced members coming from different regions and backgrounds, all united by a shared commitment of promoting documentation worldwide. Our board has decided to focus on 4 core goals and projects for this period. The first area is governance and internal administrative documentation. We identified a need to update and clarify what we do as a committee, and to create new guidelines that reflect who we are today. This includes finalizing a clear division of labor for the board, publishing new working group guidelines, and revising our conference procedures, as well as developing standards for conference video clips and metadata. All of this is about making our internal structures more transparent and sustainable. The second one, documentation standards development, is at the very heart of what we do, supporting and promoting standards and creating practical materials to help professionals implement them. For this term, we plan to develop baseline training materials in collaboration with our working groups, revise and update our fact sheets and guidelines, and finalize the committee definition of museum documentation. We are also engaging with ICOM headquarters and other international committees on a shared glossary following a resolution passed in 2025. The third area is the advancement of the International Journal of Museum Documentation. This is a partnership between the National University of Mexico, UNAM, through the Instituto de Investigaciones Estéticas, and a broad coalition of ICOM documentation members. Our immediate goals are to finalize the journal's committee and internal rules, work with ICOM headquarters to approve the necessary documents, and gather content for issue 0 with the aim of launching in late 2026 or early 2027. This is an ambitious project, but we are making steady progress. Finally, the fourth area is outreach, networking, and communication. To increase visibility, grow our membership, and encourage knowledge transfer, we are continuing the work of our previous term and building on it. We are launching a task force to develop a committee statement on AI, for example, and we are also working on concrete training outreach goals in coordination with a revision of our training materials. We are also identifying other international and national committees to collaborate with once our roadmap is in place. In essence, this is ICOM documentation. We are a group that recognizes the voluntary and active work of our members, colleagues, who generously give their time and expertise. We are committed to promoting the best possible practices across a global and diverse community. We care about fostering a culture of documentation, about inclusive documentation, and about connecting cultural heritage knowledge across borders. And in the context of Museums Connect Without Borders, we are very aware that this is not just a technical or a theoretical issue. This is a human social issue as well, that is affecting people, collections, and institutions as we speak. As there is no one-size-fits-all solution, we believe it is essential to approach the work with sensitivity and with a genuine openness to different perspectives. By joining forces and building community efforts, we can contribute to make a real difference. That is what we are here for. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Edurne. Thank you. Before I invite our keynote speakers, just a quick logistical note. For the audience, if you have any questions, please make sure to type them into the Q&A box and not the chat box. We will get to as many of them as possible at the end of the talk. And now, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our first speaker. I'm so excited to hear his presentation. Dr. Ihor Poshyvailo from Kiev, Ukraine, who is a cultural anthropologist, museum professional, curator, and researcher of contested history. Since 2016, he has served as General Director of the National Museum of the Revolution of Dignity, Maidan Museum. He is the former chair of the Museum Council at the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine and former vice chair of the ICOM Disaster Risk Management Committee. He holds a PhD in history, is a corresponding member of the Archaeological Institution of America, and was a Fulbright scholar at Smithsonian Institution. Following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he co-founded the Heritage Emergency Response Initiative, the Agency for Cultural Resilience, and the CER Regional Hub for the Black Sea region, leading emergency response and recovery efforts for war-damaged cultural heritage. His work has been recognized with the Cultural Protection Award UK, the AIA Award for the Outstanding Public Service USA, and the 2024 Kenneth Hudson Award for the European Museum Forum. Ihor, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to join you today and to contribute to this ICOM webinar on a subject that over the past 4 years has fundamentally changed my own understanding of museum work. For most museum professionals, documentation is one of the foundations of our daily practice. It allows us to identify collections, record provenance, monitor condition, support conservation, facilitate research, and ensure accountability. Also, visitors rarely notice it. Documentation is the invisible infrastructure that enables museums to preserve knowledge and pass it on to future generations. For many years, I regarded documentation primarily in this traditional sense, as an essential component of professional collection management. Working with museums affected by the war in Ukraine profoundly reshaped that understanding. What gradually became evident was that documentation is much more than a mechanism for recording information. Under emergency conditions, it becomes an operational tool that supports decisions, coordinates multidisciplinary teams, preserves continuity throughout rescue operations, and creates the information upon which future recovery ultimately depends. Of course, Ukraine did not choose to become a laboratory for emergency documentation. Yet the scale of destruction, the number of affected museums, by now over 100, and the urgency of rescue operations have required museum professionals to develop, adapt, and test approaches that may also prove valuable far beyond our own country. Also, the examples I will discuss today originate from an armed conflict. I believe the professional questions they raise are relevant whatever and wherever museums face earthquakes, floods, fires, climate-related disasters, or other emergencies. Rather than presenting a comprehensive methodology, I would like to share how a series of practical challenges gradually transformed our understanding of museum documentation. Looking back, 4 questions proved particularly important in shaping that evolution. Each emerged from a specific field experience we had. Each requires us to rethink established professional practice, and together they led us to develop new approaches that now guide much of our work here in Ukraine. So the first question emerged during one of our earliest emergency missions. How do we make informed decisions after a museum has been damaged? At first glance, the answer appears straightforward. We assess the damage, secure the building, and begin rescuing the collections. In reality, however, every one of these actions depends upon something more fundamental, which is the availability of reliable information. I still remember walking into one of the first museums we visited only a few hours after a missile strike. The building had suffered extensive damage. Windows were shattered, rainwater was entering the storage areas, and museum staff had already begun rescuing paintings, archaeological artifacts, and archival materials. Amidst the urgency and understandable desire to save as much as possible, the same question was repeatedly asked. What should we save first? And of course, our answer was quite simple. Before moving anything, let us document. This was not an attempt to delay the rescue operation. Of course not, quite the opposite. We quickly realized that without documentation, every subsequent decision became more uncertain. Which objects had already been affected by the blast? Which fragments belonged together? Which environmental risks were increasing? Which interventions had already taken place, and by whom? And most importantly, what information might disappear forever if it was not recorded immediately? That experience fundamentally changed our understanding of documentation. So we no longer regarded it as an activity that follows an emergency. Instead, we began to see documentation as one of the first emergency intervention itself. Its purpose was not to simply to create records, but to provide the reliable information necessary for making informed decisions under rapidly changing conditions. This experience also revealed another important challenge. Emergency response brings together professionals with very different expertise. museum curators, registrars, conservators, architects, structural engineers, firefighters, emergency responders, volunteers, and local authorities. Each observes the same situation from a different perspective, applies different terminology, and naturally focuses on different priorities. What enables such multidisciplinary teams to work effectively is not simply good communication, which is also quite important, but the shared documentation methodology. This is precisely why the emergency documentation approaches developed by ICOM and UNESCO have proved so valuable for us. Their greatest strength lies not only in the assessment forms themselves, but in the common language they establish. Standardized documentation enables specialists from different disciplines to record observations consistently, compare findings, and jointly determine priorities for emergency actions. In our own work, we adapted this methodology around 5 practical steps that can be applied in almost any emergency situation. First, ensure safety. Documentation should never begin until the site has been assessed and declared safe for entry. Second, record the situation before any intervention. Photographs, videos, and written observations should capture the original condition before objects are moved or emergency measures begin. Third, use standard terminology and metadata. Consistency is essential if documentation is to be shared between different professionals and institutions. Fourth, prioritize risks rather than damage alone. The most severely damaged object is not always the one requiring immediate intervention. Documentation should help identify those risks that are still evolving and therefore require urgent action. Finally, make documentation immediately accessible. Information collected in the field should support decisions while the emergency is still unfolding, not weeks later when the reports are completed. Increasingly, these methodologies are complemented by digital technologies. We now combine structured documentation forms with digital photography, photogrammetry, laser scanning, GIS mapping, and more recently UNESCO's immersive VR application, which provides new opportunities for training and standardized damage assessment. These technologies significantly improve the consistency of documentation and facilitate collaboration between multidisciplinary teams. Looking back, I believe this was the first important lesson our experience offered. Documentation is valuable not simply because it records information. Its real value lies in enabling informed professional decisions under conditions of uncertainty. Once we understood this, however, another challenge immediately emerged. Damage assessment often lasted only a few hours. The rescue operation continued for days or even weeks. Objects were moved, fragments were collected, emergency conservation had begun, documentation could no longer stop with the initial assessment. It had to accompany the rescue process itself. This led us to our second question. How should documentation accompany the rescue of museum collections? Damage assessment is only the beginning of an emergency response, and it's quite clear for many of us here. Once the immediate risks have been identified and the building has been secured, another, often much longer phase begins. Objects are moved, fragments are collected, emergency conservation measures are introduced, temporary storage identified and well organized, and eventually collections begin their journey towards stabilization, conservation, and recovery. And very quickly, we realized that documentation could not stop once the assessment had been completed. On the contrary, it had to accompany every subsequent intervention. This became particularly evident for us during the emergency response following the missile attack on the Kyiv State Academy of Decorative Arts and Design, named after Mikhailo Boychuk, last year. And you can see the photograph here from that site. Also, primarily an educational institution, the Academy also housed unique artworks, student projects, archival materials, and teaching collections representing several generations of Ukrainian artists. Many of these objects had never been prepared for emergency evacuation, nor had existing documentation anticipated the kind of damage caused by a missile strike. Together with colleagues from UNESCO, the Academy, conservators, volunteers, and emergency responders, we organized a large-scale salvage operation. The objective was not simply to remove damaged objects from what has left from the building. It was to preserve as much information as possible throughout the rescue process. This distinction proved fundamental. Every intervention generated new information that would later become essential for conservation and collection management. Where exactly had an object been found? Had it already been moved? Which fragments belonged together? What emergency stabilization had already been carried out? Which temporary materials had been used? Where had the object been relocated? Who had documented the interventions? Without reliable answers to these questions, future conservation would become considerably more difficult. In some cases, the loss of information could prove almost as serious as the physical damage itself. Our experience gradually led us to reconsider what exactly should be documented during salvage operations. Traditionally, museum documentation focuses on the object itself. Emergency documentation, however, must also record the process. It should document not only the condition of the object, but also every significant intervention that affects its future conservation. For this reason, I would summarize our second lesson in the following way. Effective stabilization begins before the first object is moved. From our experience, 5 practical recommendations may be useful for museums responding to emergencies. So the first one, maintain object identity by preserving or assigning a unique identifier from the very beginning of the rescue operation. Next, document the context before movement, including the original location and the relationship between damaged objects whenever possible. The third one, record every intervention, however temporary, including emergency conservation, packing, transport, and temporary storage. The fourth one, maintain continuity of information, ensuring that documentation accompanies the object throughout every stage of rescue and recovery. And the fifth one, use documentation as a coordination tool, allowing conservators, museum staff, engineers, architects, emergency responders to work from the same information. These recommendations are neither complex nor technologically demanding. They rely primarily on consistency, discipline, and shared professional standards. They also prepared us for a very different challenge. As we continued working with damaged museums across Ukraine, many museum directors began asking a new question. What can we do before the next emergency occurs? It soon became clear that responding well to emergencies would never be enough. Museums also needed to strengthen their documentation capacity before disaster struck. The experience gained during emergency assessments and salvage operations gradually led us to a broader question. How can museums strengthen their documentation capacity before the next emergency comes? This question became increasingly important as we continued working with museums across Ukraine, regardless of their size or location. Many museum professionals asked remarkably similar questions. How could they better protect their documentation? Which collections should be digitized first? What equipment would be most useful? How could they continue documentation if electricity, internet access, or even access to the museum itself became unavailable? These considerations made us realize that preparedness could no longer be understood simply as having an emergency plan. Preparedness also means ensuring that essential information about collections already exists, is accessible, securely backed up, and can continue to support decisions under emergency conditions. In many museums, however, this represented a considerable challenge. Collection documentations in Ukraine often existed in several parallel forms. Inventory books remained on paper, registration cards had never been digitized, photographic documentation varied in quality and completeness, digital databases, where they existed, were often stored on local computers without systematic backup procedures. The vulnerability of documentation itself had become one of the most significant risks for such like museum collections. We also recognized another important issue. The challenge was not only technological, it was institutional. Many museums lacked equipment, trained personnel, or practical experience in organizing large-scale digitization projects. Purchasing scanners or cameras alone would not solve the problem. Museums needed practical support, opportunities to develop new skills, and confidence to build sustainable documentation workflows using resources that remained available after the project had ended. These considerations eventually led us to establish the Mobile Digital Laboratory, supported by the SIR and ALIF programs. Also, the laboratory provides specialized equipment. Its primary purpose is not to digitize collections on behalf of museums. Its principal objective is to strengthen institutional capacity. Wherever possible, museum professionals carry out the digitizations themselves, working alongside our team. They learn practical workflows, test different equipment, discuss metadata standards, and gain experience that remain within the institution after the laboratory leaves. In this sense, the laboratory functions less as a service provider and more as a mobile training environment. This distinction for us is fundamental. The most valuable outcome is not the number of objects digitized during a single visit. It is the capacity that remains after the visit has ended. Our documentation priorities have also evolved considerably. Naturally, museums seek to digitize their collections, especially those at the front lines. However, our experience demonstrated that documenting the documentation is equally important. These documents often contain information that exists nowhere else. Unfortunately, they have also become targets during armed conflict. Russian forces in Ukraine have repeatedly removed not only museum objects, but also inventory books, catalogs, and collection documentation from occupied museums. Without these records, identifying stolen objects, proving ownership, and supporting future restitution become significantly more difficult. For this reason, preserving museum documentation has become an essential component of protecting museum collections themselves. So our work has gradually developed into a practical preparedness methodology consisting of 5 interconnected stages. The first stage is prioritization, because not every collection can be digitized immediately, and we should admit it. Museums should begin by identifying the collections and documentation at greater risk or of a highest significance. The second stage is the digitization. This includes both museum objects and the documentation associated with them, following agreed standards for image quality and metadata. The third stage is quality control. Digital files should be reviewed systematically to ensure completeness, consistency, and long-term usability. The fourth stage is secure storage and backup. Copies should be maintained in multiple location storages using reliable solutions that remain accessible during emergencies. And the fifth stage is capacity building, training museum professionals, developing internal procedures, and strengthening international institutional confidence are essential if preparedness is to become sustainable. This final stage may be the most important. Equipment eventually becomes outdated, software changes, storage technologies evolve, but professional knowledge remains within the institution. Another principle has also become central to our work. Rather than encouraging donors and museums to purchase or acquire by different ways expensive equipment that may be used only occasionally, we increasingly advocate a model of resource sharing, especially in a crisis time. So under emergency conditions, the resilience often depends upon less on individual institutional capacity than on networks of cooperation. Looking back, I believe this has been one of the most valuable lessons we have learned. Preparedness is not created when an emergency begins. It is built long before the first crisis occurs. It is built long before the first crisis occurs, of course. It's important. Documentation plays a central role in that process because it transforms collections into accessible, secure, and usable information capable of supporting future decisions. Our work on preparedness gradually raised another question that extended beyond museum management and conservation. So how can museum documentation contribute to accountability, restitution, and justice? Our experience also revealed the role of museum documentation that before the full-scale invasion, we had rarely considered. Increasingly, documentation was being requested not only by museums and conservators, but also by investigators, prosecutors, governmental authorities, and international organizations. Information originally created to support collection management and conservation was now being used to document damage, verify provenance, identify stolen or illicitly trafficked objects, and support future restitution. This represented an important shift. Museum documentation should not become a sustainable or a substitute for criminal investigation. nor should museum professionals be expected to assume the role of forensic experts. However, museum possesses knowledge that no other institution holds, which is detailed information about collections, the history, provenance, condition, significance. When documented systematically and according to professional standards, this information can become an essential component of broader accountability mechanisms. Recognizing this challenge, we have begun working with museum professionals, conservators, investigators, prosecutors, and legal experts to develop a common documentation methodology that respects both museum standards and the evidentiary requirements of criminal investigations. This work is still evolving. We had several workshops last year, we planned some this year, but several principles have already become clear. So museum documentation should preserve context as carefully as it preserves objects. It should record not only what have been damaged or lost, but also where, when, and under what circumstances the damage occurred. Whenever possible, documentation should maintain a clear chain of information, ensuring that photographs, condition reports, and other records remain traceable, authentic, and securely preserved. Perhaps most importantly, documentation created during the early stages of an emergency often proves invaluable years later, when museums begin recovery, when stolen objects appear on the art markets, or even when legal procedures require reliable evidence. Looking back at these experiences, I believe they point towards a broader understanding of documentation. So documentation is not simply a museum procedure. It is a continuous process that supports preparedness before a crisis, informed decision-making during emergency response, continuity throughout salvage and conservation, and ultimately, accountability during stabilization and recovery. So this understanding had gradually shaped our own approaches to emergency documentation, but I hope it may also contribute to wider professional discussions within the international museum community. Allow me now to conclude with 5 practical recommendations that summarize our experience. So first, prepare documentation before crisis occurs. Emergency documentation is most effective when museums already have reliable inventories, digitized records, and trained staff. Second, document before intervening. Whenever circumstances permit, record the condition and context of collections before objects are moved or emergency measures begin. Third, maintain continuity. Documentation should accompany objects throughout evacuation, temporary storage, conservation, and recovery. Fourth, protect documentation itself. Inventory books, registration records, conservation files, and digital databases are part of the collection's memory and deserve the same level of protection as museum objects. And finally, invest in people as much as technology. Digital tools continue to transform documentation, but resilience ultimately depends on trained professionals, shared methodologies, and strong institutional cooperation. These are, of course, lessons learned under exceptional circumstances. We sincerely hope that many museums will never need to apply them in situations of armed conflict. Nevertheless, every emergency, whether caused by war, an earthquake, a flood, or fire, raises remarkably similar professional questions. Preparing for those questions before a crisis occurs is perhaps one of the most important responsibilities we as museum professionals share. I would therefore like to finish with one final thought. Every museum hopes it will never need emergency documentation. Our responsibility, however, is to ensure that if such a day comes, museums are prepared, not only with emergency plans and equipment, but also with the knowledge, skills, and documentation systems that enable them to protect both their collections and the information that gives those collections meaning. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ihor, for this wonderful talk. Really enjoyed it. Dear friends, once again, if you would like to listen in Arabic or Persian, please select your preferred language channel from the interpretation menu at the bottom of your Zoom window. The presentations include Arabic subtitle, so therefore for Arabic participants, simultaneous interpretation will be provided only for the live interventions by the moderator and the project team. And for the Persian interpretation, it will be provided simultaneously throughout the entire webinar. And if you have any questions, please make sure to type them in the Q&A box and not the chat box. We will go to as many of them as possible at the end of the talk. Before we go for the next presentation, let me announce that ICOM documentation next conference in 2026 will happen from November 16 to 20 in Belgium at the Africa Museum. And the topic is the documentation in context, historical legacies and future directions. And now, I'm very delighted to introduce our next speaker, Elke Kellner. Elke Kellner received an MA in art history and studied archaeology at the University of Vienna, Austria, and Yale University, USA. Since 2014, she has been the managing director of the National Committee of ICOM Austria. Elke is an expert in emergency management in museums and is the editor of the publication Emergency Management for Museums and Cultural Heritage Institutions 2026. She initiated the series of ICOM Palmyra talks to support the fight against looting and illicit trafficking of cultural goods and is an expert for the OSCE in that field and a member of the OSCE Heritage Crime Task Force. Elke is lecturing at different law enforcement training workshops for the OSCE, the Smithsonian Museum, US Homeland Security, and the US Department of the OSCE, US Department of State, and the Austrian Armed Forces. In 2016, she lectured at the Master Course Cultural Heritage at the Damwald University in Krems, Austria. Since 2014, she has been a board member of Blue Shield Austria, and from 2019 to 2025, she was a board member of ICOM Europe. Since 2011, she serves as head of the event department and at the same time journalist at the Radio 1 Science Department. Dear Elke, very good to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, welcome to the ICOM series Museum Connect Without Borders. I'm very happy to give the lecture here on emergency preparedness for museums in the context of conflict and climate change. And I hope I can give you a first impression as a start of this webinar series. ICOM is the International Council of Museums. We are the international non-governmental organizations for museum and museum professionals. We are committed to research, conservation, communication of the world's cultural and natural heritage to society. We are the voice of museum professionals all over the world with over 60,000 members. ICOM sets the standards for professional museum work. Just recently, we have issued a new ICOM Code of Ethics, but one of the central things ICOM is working on, of course, is the protection of heritage and the risk management in times of crisis. And this is what this webinar will be all about. Our mission is to support museums as they preserve the natural and cultural heritage of humanity in their collections. And this is one of the key missions of a museum, of course, the objects we want to preserve for the coming generations, and we have a special responsibility on this. The dangers for our collections are multifacets. We have natural disasters, extreme weather, neglect, technical problems, cyber attacks, theft, you name it, a very diverse spectrum of dangers that can affect our museums. So we have to be prepared for all kinds of dangers that we have to face. The main threats for the museums are compacted in like 4 big groups. The first one is climate change and extreme weather events that come with it, technical neglects, crime, theft, robbery, vandalism, and armed conflict and terrorism. And this will be the structure and overview I want to present to you. Let's start with emergency management in the times of climate change, in the times of climate crisis. In recent years, climate change has led to an increase in extreme weather events worldwide. Long periods of drought and severe heat waves are followed by thunderstorms and heavy rainfalls. Flood landslides are occurring much more frequently and can cause major damage. Extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and more severe all over the world because warmer air can carry much more moisture. For every temperature that gets warmer, 7% of moisture can be taken on by the air. So we have much more dangers of flooding, which are twice as likely due to climate change. And flood events all over the world are expected to increase by around half globally by the end of the century. Here you see some pictures of floodings we had in September of 24 in Lower Austria. We've also affected museums. The other big danger, of course, is fire, the most usual one, especially in the context of building construction or repair works on the roof. We remember very well the fire of Notre Dame 2019 or the fires at the Bourse in Copenhagen, all related to construction work. So we highly recommend a 24-hour fire watch if any repairs are going on, because fire is one of the most destructive dangers that we have to face. Technical defects, neglect of collections. Here you see a picture of the Vienna Hofburg. Flooding occurred due to a burst water pipe very quickly, and you see how immense the effect can get through a small technical defect. Crime, theft, robbery, vandalism, all those are affecting museums. Here you see a picture from the robbery last year in the Louvre, where important and very valuable objects from the collections were stolen. ICOM is requesting tougher security checks for security employees, tougher security for to keep the collections safe, and to work together with law enforcement that support you in measures to prepare for such events. Of course, museums are a central stage also for discourse in our society. Different groups of activists. You see here a group Stop Oil, or you might know Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion, Last Generation or such. They are fighting to be more aware of the climate crisis, to reduce carbon emissions worldwide. And since 2022, renowned museums were often chosen as targets for those actions to get awareness, to get media coverage. And they were attacking iconic objects to attract this attention. Here you see a picture with event taking place at the National Gallery in London. Those actions were carefully choreographed and also monitored over social media. And museums are open and very safe spaces for discussions, and we are supporting that. But on the other side, we have to keep our collections safe, and those can have dangerous effects. Also, one must mention that in the climate demonstrations, none of those paintings were harmed. They were carefully chosen to only do that to protected objects, but nevertheless, we don't think that that's a very appropriate measure to fight climate change, and we hope to support that in other ways. Of course, heritage in armed conflict and war is especially in danger. Also, the 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in Events of the Armed Conflict was ratified by many countries, especially Russia. Here you see a picture from the war against Ukraine. But still, cultural heritage is nowadays increasingly targeted, looted, or deliberately destroyed to attack a country's identity. ICOM has issued many statements. Here you see one from April this year to express its alarm over those military actions. We see armed conflicts and wars going on all over the world at the moment. Here, especially the conflicts in Iran, Palestine, Israel, Sudan, Lebanon, and Ukraine are mentioned. That impose big harm and danger to our cultural objects, but also, of course, to our museum colleagues and the whole population of these countries, of course. In wars and armed conflicts, culturally significant objects, works, and monuments are often deliberately attacked, and to attack the history, the culture, and the identity of a community, to polarize and divide societies, to undermine the morals and values of those societies, or to stage cultural assets for propaganda purposes. The stolen cultural objects sometimes are used as a source of income for terrorist organizations, for example. The museums are targeted for destruction or damage. Of course, there's theft, looting, robbery going on. And there's also, of course, unintentional or accidental destructions. And of course, always in states of crisis, our collections are also vulnerable just for criminal theft and robberies. The attacks on cultural heritage are, of course, going on for a long time, but starting from the year 2001 with the destruction of the Buddha statues in Bamiyan by the Taliban, we again have to really face an attack on the history and the identity of a culture, of a people, And this is what ICOM really stands up against. Here we see also looting in Apamea, a town in Syria. Here you see Apamea is a former Roman town, which excavations going on from Swiss colleagues. And just a year after the archaeologists has to leave due to the political and safety situations in Syria, massive, almost industrial scale looting was going on, and every one of those little holes stands for objects and knowledge that we are missing now for science and for the heritage of Syria. It was followed by the destructions in the oasis town in Palmyra, also in Syria. Here you see the destroyed Baal temple in Syria in 2016. We have the recent attacks in Iran just a few weeks ago on the Sabdat Cultural Historical Complex and the Golestan Palace in Tehran, with destruction going on there. We see the plundering of the Sudan National Museum in Khartoum in 2025 with horrible destructions. I think many objects were able to be saved by the museum colleagues of that museum, but still massive destructions and plundering. I mentioned Ukraine already. Here you see the current numbers. The Russian invasion of Ukraine started in 22, and we have more than 563 cultural sites that have been damaged in some kind. Some have been plundered, some have been destroyed, and we're monitoring this very closely. Here you see some pictures from social media to document the looting of Russian armed forces in Kherson. We have the art museum in Kherson, and on the opposite, the Museum of Local Lore. And you see Russian soldiers plundering that, bringing paintings into the trucks and transferring them to the annexed Crimea, to a museum in Simferopol. So those are all examples of the war on cultural heritage, that cultural heritage is increasingly targeted or deliberately destroyed in order to attack a country's identity. And also many countries have undersigned the 1954 Hague Convention, which names those crimes as definitely war crimes. We still, unfortunately, see many of those things going on. ICOM and our museums and museum professionals play an important role in building lasting peace among nations. So we have to increase our efforts, and this very, very well-intentioned seminar and webinar series is trying to accomplish that and to support that role of museums and to keep our collections safe. Many ICOM committees, national committees, also support other countries. Here we see some pictures from help transports that ICOM Austria initiated to help our colleagues in Ukraine. And many other countries also started initiatives like that. In Ukraine, there is a first national team of cultural first aiders to help save items from collections or from buildings like churches or other cultural sites. So we see that emergency management in times of crisis is increasingly important. Of course, in a time of uncertainty, in a time of crisis, cultural objects can easily be trafficked and sold on the international art market. We're also working strongly with law enforcement to fight this. And the ICOM red lists that you probably all very well know, especially target those very exposed items that are prone for illicit trafficking, and examples of those items that are especially at risk are listed in the red list. We have a very good international database in a lot of different languages that you can access via the international ICOM website, and who give examples of the most endangered objects, especially also for the use of law enforcement, for customs officers. And ICOM Austria especially is very closely working together with the OSCE, who initiated the Heritage Crime Task Force. This is an international expert team created to disrupt illicit trafficking on cultural property antiquities. It investigates the deep ties between heritage looting, organized crime, and terrorism financing and money laundering, with the 57 OSCE participating states, and ICOM internationally is also cooperating with other big law enforcement networks such as Interpol or Europol. The object ID standard is a very good measurement to describe objects. It's very important that you keep your inventories, that you keep them digitally and in writing, keep them safe, so you have copies and backup in the event of crisis. And the object ID standards gives you the resources to do that in a very consistent and practical way. So do you have an emergency plan? Preparedness is really the key for museums to face all those dangers. And last year, ICOM Austria started to work on a broad platform of organizations in our country to create a hand-on guideline to assess the risk, to develop emergency plans, to react in crisis, and to learn from experience. And I want to give you on this guideline a quick preview. It's still in German, but we're currently working on an English transition in the emergency work. It's always good to get all the experts together, to get all the institutions of a country together. So that's what we were doing here in Austria, and you see some of the experts here. And I just want to start with the disaster management circle. That's quite the first step to be aware of. The preparedness, the circle in this preparedness is to prepare yourself for what's coming, to protect your collection, to respond accordingly, and if possible, to prevent those dangers and destructions. So the best protection is always be prevention. So we need the knowledge and the skills to effectively anticipate and respond to recover from the impacts of disasters. To be prepared for an emergency situation, cultural heritage institutions must plan accordingly. Emergencies and disasters cannot always be prevented. However, with good planning and safety measures, the impact of such events can be reduced to a minimum. And that's why it's essential to have an emergency plan. And we had this put together in 4 chapters: preparedness, creating the emergency plan, how to act in crisis response, and afterwards post-event and evaluation. So to create an emergency plan, it's good to have a clear structure to get everybody on board, to provide the safety for your staff and for your visitors. That's our number 1 priority. And of course, keep our collections safe, keep our buildings safe. And how to do this? We propose 9 steps to build your emergency plan, to make it as easy for you as possible to get this done. So the first step, of course, is the preparation. Get everything together that you need, all the plans of your museum. Where are the water connections? Where are the gas connections? Whatever is important. And the risk analysis followed by that you can assess your situation what are the threats, what are the emergencies that are most likely in your area. Maybe have there some emergencies already occurred in the past? Which hazards are especially important to realize? Where is the collection especially vulnerable? And to identify those hazards. You see here on the right side the risk matrix, where you can put your institution into this matrix. So is it very likely that you have flooding? Yes, maybe it has never happened before. And on the other scale, you see what would the effect on your institution would be. Are you very well prepared for flooding, or would the flooding destroy most of your collection? So the risk matrix is one of the tools that you can take on to monitor those risks and to take the appropriate measures for institutions. You can download these scales in different publications already. We in Austria, we have a digital system that makes us aware of the dangers of flooding. So we can see how museums would be affected of different flood levels. So this is also very useful, that you can see the impacts of flooding on your museum. And in an emergency situation, you have to apply your emergency plan to keep cool, to be prepared, to have your crisis management teams, your first responders. But to really be able to work effectively, you have to have your emergency plan first, and really create security measures, safety measures, protective measures for your institutions. And one of the top priorities, of course, is to maintain inventory lists and to store them securely, to plan emergency measures, and to exercise those emergency measures. And of course, the evacuation of objects can be one of those measures. Museums and the storage facilities contain invaluable treasures for all of us. A disaster such as a fire or a flood is a terrible prospect for all of us, but it's important to be prepared for these major challenges. And we will not be able to save all the objects, but we certainly can save some of them. And therefore, we highly recommend to prioritize collections in advance. So it depends on the nature of the emergency, of course, and the associated time factors, which objects you will try to save. So you have to analyze your collections. What kind of objects do we have? Which hazards can pose the greatest risk of our objects? So maybe during a flood, you could have more time to evacuate objects than during a fire that destroys a building very quickly, and it would be very dangerous to go inside during the fire. So those things need to be taken in accord. So which objects can be evacuated, which should be evacuated first, and who makes the decisions? Certainly not easy questions, because for us museum professionals, all objects are valuable and important. Nevertheless, only a few objects should be marked in our exhibition and storage areas, not more than 10–15% of the whole collections. So you have to think about what objects to pick. It can be the historic or artistic significance, the rarity or uniqueness of an object, the completeness, the significance of these objects for your collection, for your institution, the insurance value, monetary value. Is it a loan maybe from another museum? How important is the object for your state, for your region, for your nation? Are there duplicates of the objects? Can it be reproduced, or is it irreplaceable? What is the scientific value? So all those questions have to be asked. And of course, the museum curators, the museum leaders have to take this decision. And not always the monetary value is the most significant one. The historical or sentimental value can be much more significant. But also we have to think about, can these selected objects be transported easily via the escape routes? Can they be carried by two people? Can they be moved through doors or carried up or down the stairs? Are they very heavy? Can they be taken down from the exhibition walls easily? So all this has to be taken in consideration. And you see here one form from the UNESCO, how to proceed in an emergency evacuation. You always have to make sure that it's really necessary to evacuate objects, because every moving of objects can also be a form of danger for the object, of course. So you have to prepare the wrapping material, prepare your evacuation lists, so you can really document all the objects that you want to transport, work in teams, wrap them carefully, put them into the list, and then on the transport location. You always have to have the overview on your transported objects. You have to prepare emergency materials, maybe emergency depots and storage rooms that are easily accessible, that are safe, that have security and protection for those emergency storages. And one of the materials we developed in Austria is the ICOM priority tag for the evacuation of cultural heritage. This tag marks objects in museum storages that should be evacuated with priority. So it's a uniform marking to be used in all museum storages worldwide. It's coordinated with Blue Shield International, highly reflective, very clear marking. You see the Blue Shield marking also. It's all about finding and identifying objects very quickly, and not only for museum personnel, but also for armed forces, for fire brigade or police forces, who all should be aware of this international marking. In our publication, we also put in a lot of downloads. I mentioned the evacuation of objects. You have the list for evacuation. We have also a download for an object sticker, so you can really document the objects you are moving. And this is very important to keep your objects safe in an emergency event. Here you see examples for floor plans for objects in an exhibition area. So contrary to the storage area, we saw the tag before. In an exhibition area, you can't use such a big tag, of course, to mark the object. So we have floor plans where the object is clearly described, and you see all the materials and personnel you need to take it down and to evacuate these objects. So these plans then are stored in the emergency cases for the fire brigades and for the museum workers that can easily access them during an emergency. We also developed a lot of pictograms, icons for handling of objects, for tools that you need for safeguarding objects. You can all download those icons for free. You see the QR code down there. It's all museum specific. And if you have developed your emergency plan, you of course have to define who is responsible, who will act, who is taking the decisions, who is my emergency team, to really be able to act in an emergency. Then you have to store your plan and in emergency plan folders. You see one, the red one down there for the fire brigade, do a second one for the museum staff. And of course, all museum staff have to be on board. They have to be informed, and everybody needs to know what they're supposed to do in an emergency, because it's always a very stressful, very emotional situation also. So to have everybody informed, and of course to practice this emergency plan, because the best plan doesn't work if we don't put it into practice and see if it's really working out, and if we really have covered all the different events. So exercising is really key, and the best exercise would also be to work together with your local fire brigades, with your local police, or maybe also armed forces. In Austria, we have a very good cooperation here, and to really put your emergency plan into practice. You can start with very easy tabletop exercising with just the museum staff and get bigger step by step to almost real life exercises with many partners. Here you see one that we conducted at an abbey in Lower Austria already a few years ago. Here you see a picture from an emergency exercise with museum staff. Here we had a water damage simulated, objects that were affected by flooding, dirty water, and we trained the staff members to work together to secure the objects, to analyze them, to prepare them for conservation, and so on. So in an emergency situation, it's very critical at first to assess the situation. What is the acute damage? What is the danger? Am I safe to enter the building even? So you have always to take care of your staff members, of your visitors first, and then if when the situation is safe enough, you can proceed and try to save the objects and first aid for cultural objects. There's a lot of material out there from our conservators, colleagues, ICOM CC and others really have very good first aid instructions for cultural objects, and the water damage, of course, is one of the most common ones, and to try to stabilize objects and to stop the exposure from harmful substances. And in that case, to clean them and to dry them is very important, to be able to act quickly, to have all the materials ready that you need for such an operation, and of course, if it's possible, always consult the conservator and work together with the conservators. But the better your emergency plan is to outline all those procedures and actions, and the better you are prepared with emergency material, the better you can react to situations like that. So every emergency also represents an opportunity to learn lessons for future incidents, and so it's important to document these experiences and be prepared next time. So I mentioned we are already working on an English translations of the publication of this guidebook, Emergency Management in Museums and Cultural Institutions. Here you can still download the German version, but you can also access all the download material I mentioned. So to conclude, museums are not only to preserve our heritage, but even they serve as public spaces in an open society and institutions of a democratic society. Museums address the challenges of today's world. They promote the understanding of a complex world and contribute to human dignity and the values of justice and general equality. And in this changing world, our heritage is not only about preserving objects of stones and ruins, but it defines our history, our identity, and who we are as human beings. So in the year of ICOM's 80th birthday celebration, we strengthened those key missions of museums, and I hope this webinar can be a part to strengthen our resilience in emergency preparation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Elke, for this amazing talk. I really enjoyed it. We have numerous questions. Just before we begin the Q&A question, just a quick note for our speakers. Please remember, pause briefly after each sentence so that our simultaneous translators can keep up with you. Thank you so much. And let's dive into the questions. So the first one, one of our colleagues from Afghanistan, we are facing a lot of problems in the documentation sector in Afghanistan because a large number of historical documents were burned due to the civil wars. My question is, when the documents of the past do not exist, but the work itself exists, on what basis should we go for the documentation process of these works? Any of you, Ihor, Elke?
Okay, thank you. It's a good question and quite problematic, because if all documentation lost, what you can do? Of course, you should launch a kind of a research. You try to launch the possible actions if, for example, local communities still exist in the location from which the documentation of local artifacts is lost. You try to approach them and try to reconstruct all the information lost. Of course, it's a very complicated process, and maybe it's another topic for webinar discussion, because our main focus today is what you do to prevent complete loss. In Ukraine, this question is also very relevant, because the aggressor, the occupiers, they steal, they loot not only artifacts themselves, they loot the documentation, inventories, not only inventory books, but also computers, where this information is kept in digital form. Because it's a strategy, it's not by chance, it's a strategy. Because restitution could be quite difficult if you do not know the provenance, if you lose the basic information. And we as museum professionals know that the significance of the object, a museum item, for example, is not so, is a half price, for example, half of its significance if the information about it is lost. So you should find the ways according to your context, to your situation, to retry to collect all the information lost from individuals, from local community, from scientists, researchers, from maybe Afghanistan diaspora abroad. I visited so many great exhibitions in other countries, in the United States, in European countries, about Afghanistan gold, for example, or ecological findings. So maybe some information about the collection lost in your country can be saved during the traveling exhibitions by your colleagues abroad. So there should be some ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Next question. I think maybe Elke can answer this. How should a museum be prepared for flood?
Flooding is a danger that can be met better, because normally you have some time to prepare yourself. You have to watch closely for the weather reports that are issued. Is there a big thunderstorm coming or something like that? And if maybe your museum is in a flood area, you have had flooding before. So if you know there is flooding coming, it would be good to have emergency measures like blocking the doors, blocking all the cellars, blocking all the windows where water could access the building. And on the other side, if you have storages in the cellar or in the ground floor or exhibition halls in the ground floor, try to move the collections to the upper floors, first, second floor in the same building, or if this is not possible, try to move the collections to a site outside the museum, a safe emergency storage.
Thank you so much. Our next question. In times of conflict and disasters, emergency plans often focus heavily on documenting and evacuating brought-up artifacts. How can we ensure that the historical building itself, especially when the museum is housed in a historic place or a monument, is integrated into these urgent documentation and protection plans? And ultimately, which should have priority in these emergency scenarios, the building or the artifacts? Nice question.
Oh,
I
no.
can,
Maybe I let Ihor first answer because Ukraine has a lot of experience and jump in afterwards.
okay, thank you. Thank you. It's an important question. How we can ensure it's up to us. If, for example, you are responsible for built heritage, you should do everything possible to secure the building, to document the historical building. Because we are speaking about the priorities, of course, we are speaking about cultural heritage, which has different forms, movable, immovable, so there should not be priority. But during emergency, the priority is first priority. You should save whatever is accessible easily. For example, you cannot save during the bombing, shelling. You cannot protect building, of course. So you should focus your attention on protecting mobile collections. From our experience in Ukraine, we understand that it's not possible to protect building by no ways from direct strikes, missile strikes, or drones. No sandbags, no special screens can protect the building unless you document it. So one of the most effective ways of documentation and therefore a kind of protection is modern up-to-date documentation of the building itself by contemporary means, by laser scanning, if affordable, by 3D photogrammetry. So you have this building documented properly. So in case of damage or destruction, you can recover, restore, rebuild it. That's only one strategy.
Thank you so much. Eka, I guess this question is for you. Do you have an established framework or methodology for prioritizing museum objects for emergency salvage? Specifically, I'm referring to a structured model for assessing their value and determining prioritize that can be systematically applied in practice.
Yeah, this is the tough question. We know it all. I gave you a number of aspects what could be important. So you have different levels of importance of the object itself, its historical significance, scientific significance, significance for the state or community. And on the other side, you have the impact of the danger of the threat. So if you have a marble statue and you have a flooding, it won't really affect the marble statue a lot. So it wouldn't be in such a danger. But if you have a flooding and books or graphics, paperwork, then it will affect the paper naturally. So the kind of threat is important and the objects are important. And we in the museums have to consider those different aspects and in some way which will always be not perfect, have to find the most significant objects. And this list is just something that if you have time to save things, then it's very important that you have this prioritization list. If a threat comes very quickly, like a fire or a bomb, then you just save what you can save. You know, it's always depends on the factor of time and threat and object.
Thank you so
May
much.
I
Go
add?
ahead, Ihor.
Maybe in some countries there can be their own systems, because, for example, we can prioritize our collections according to, for example, group platinum, gold, or silver, or number 1, 2, 3. But the problem can be in some countries where you have very strict directions when government, for example, if your collection belong to the national so-called museum fund, and there are several special regulations, so you have no choice. In Ukraine, for example, it was quite controversial approach to prioritization. For example, the main criteria for the most valuable objects, besides what mentioned Elke, national significance or regional significance or international significance, was, how to say in English, precious metals. If the object contains gold or some valuable, I mean monetary valuable, it should be evacuated first of all. And it was badly criticized by professionals because we have, for example, a lot of medals, like from Soviet times. But of course, it's not the priority to evacuation in many museums because we have much more precious archaeological, for example, materials or some others. So it should be tested according to your special context, national context.
Because we are running out of time, I think that this would be the last question, but I think it's really, really a nice question. Is there any way that when a country is in a war situation, other countries help this country to transfer the documentation to a safe country or something like that?
Elke or me?
Yeah, I start maybe. I think in the case of Ukraine, but also in the case of the European Union, we are working on building autonomous heritage cloud solutions to have digital storage solutions independent from the US, directly in Europe, where we can store digitalized data of museum collections and also have backup of this data. And I think also the analog versions, additionally to the digital ones, are always very important. And there have been, I think also in the case of Ukraine, many scientific and kind of private initiatives to help keep the inventory safe. But I think Ihor knows more about that.
Sure, Niloufar. Sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
of course, quickly.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
We had a lot of suggestions to provide our documentation and to save them in iClouds in other countries. But the issue is whether this information be protected and safe. Because Russians, for example, in our case, Russia is the aggressor, and we take care that information do not come to them because they can monitor what's the most precious and interesting for them polluting. So the issue of security and safety is also one of the to be think of when you consider where you will protect, save, keep your duplicates, informations, backups of the inventories.
Yeah, what wars have changed. It's a lot of cyber wars and new technologies, unfortunately.
Niloufar, please open your mic.
Yes, thank you to all of you. I have absolutely enjoyed every moment of it, although it was, it is heartbreaking, which is the reality, at least in many parts of the world, to be honest. But my question is that regarding the project, the Museum Connect Without Borders was created to support colleagues working under difficult circumstances. So if any of you could leave our participants with one message of hope or one piece of practical advice to carry forward in their work, what it would be? Thank you.
Maybe I start very quickly. Working together is key in the emergency community. Get to know your colleagues, get to know the fire brigades, the armed forces, the police forces, get together and plan and work together. As in the international museum community, in the case of Austria, we want to share everything that we develop with all other countries and all other colleagues. So cooperation is so important. And thank you so much also to initiate this webinar to get the message to everybody and to increase our communication and cooperation. Thank you so much.
And from my perspective, to cooperation, I would add coordination on different levels. This is important. So don't rely only upon yourself. Think about the networks which exist, like this one we have today. So if you have questions, challenges, please never stop asking, consulting, asking for any kind of help, and you will find the solution, the best solutions.
Edurne, please. And I
Thank you.
just wanted to ask you to wrap up the session.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I hope my comment helps to this end, to this goal. First of all, I would also like to congratulate you for opening this discussion, because it's every time more necessary for people to discuss about what to do in emergency situations. And we've been receiving a lot of questions about this topic from the last 2 or 3 years. So it's a very pertinent webinar, a very pertinent project. So as part of the ICOM documentation board, I would totally like to congratulate you for that. The second thing is that, as we mentioned in our presentation, there is not a one-size-fits solution, and all the questions that people are asking right now bring this conflict between building general solutions that can fit for all, or experiences that we can take from others, and at the same time how to respond to our personal and specific situations. No, when I was listening to Ihor and to Elke, I was thinking about experiences that I have seen, not personally, but I have seen in my work, and how we have been or have not been able to attend the emergency that was at stand at that moment. So it really brings me new reflections on these two situations: building general experiences that are helpful for the community, and at the same time attending our specific needs. No? And finally, in terms of a positive message, I think that we have to reinforce this community message and the importance of what Ihor said, that documentation is an infrastructure, and it's a human infrastructure. He said, focus on people. And that I want to be very specific with that, because I think that's a very, very strong message. When we focus on people, when we invest on people, we're not investing on specific people. We have to think as a structure, as a community, and as a structure, and what that and the significance it has. And from the ICOM documentation perspective, I think that investing in this infrastructure means investing in the experience that every IC has. In our case, standards, controlled vocabularies, infrastructure, technical infrastructure for data, and that's like the expertise that this committee has. And I want to send this message for people if interested in documentation. This is what the IC can provide. And in the vision that we have right now, we're thinking about a culture of documentation, and that is what it means to having all this preventive documentation that both Ihor and Elke reinforced, and how important it is to be prepared, because I think that what they said was very important. The event the emergency event is not the event itself. It's what happens before that. And proper documentation will help us be strong in a fragile situation, and we cannot prevent being fragile. We're all fragile. Our institutions are fragile. So we work to make it less fragile, the less fragile possible. The second comment is inclusive documentation. We're working on a message of including our communities and extend our the knowledge of the communities itself around the museums. And finally, the network, the community. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Edurne, for your wrap up. Thank you, Ihor. Thank you, Elke, for this amazing session. I really enjoyed it. And everyone who participated in this session. This is the very session of Museum Connect Without Borders. I also wanted to take the chance to thank the amazing logistic team. First of all, Niloufar, thank you so much for this session. Shayan Asgharian, the Persian interpreter, Nelly Abod, the Arabic interpreter, Ali Kasai, Asiye Dehqani, May Rashad, and Roberto Torres. Thank you so much. And I also want to invite you all to join us for the next webinar, which will take place in early to mid-August about ethical communication and community engagement. To stay updated, please make sure to follow ICOM Comms on social media and check its website for all the latest details and registration link. And for those who like to take a picture, please turn on your cameras for a quick picture if you like to join us. Thank you so much. Thank you again for being here. We hope to see you all very, very soon. Have a nice day, night, evening, wherever you are.